question for you. What are some of the things that make us feel afraid? The unknown? The dark? Death? Thunder and lightning, weather, severe weather? Transition? Money? Makes us afraid. Having it or the lack thereof? Of the lack thereof. Okay, just checking. Just checking. Although people who win the big lottery may be afraid of what to do with too much. You never know. Public speaking. Okay. Illness. Okay. All wonderful, all great things. Here are a couple of sort of broader categories that the dictionary shares with us. Danger, and some of those, some of the things you've mentioned fall in that category. Evil, pain, the loss of power, and difference. A couple things to think about. Now, which of these things which of these fears do you think are real and which ones are imagined? Because a lot of the time we get afraid, our emotions kick in and we get really afraid, but when we stop and think about it, some of the things that made us have that initial reaction really aren't, they're more imagined than they are real, right? Yes, no. I find that to be the case, okay? That we have these sort of, these big things that we imagine things that might happen, what ifs. And because we can't predict what's going to happen because there are too many unknowns, somebody said the unknown, we're more likely to be fearful than to look ahead with anticipation, with happy anticipation of things. Today I want to focus on the issue of difference, because that's one of the things that's going on for the people of Rochester in today's gospel reading. We have a man who is different. He's so different that he's dangerous to himself and to others. So dangerous to himself and others that they've had to chain him and bind him. And even then, his strength became so much that they just could not keep him within the bounds of the living space, if you will, or the town or the area. And so they exiled him. They sent him out. They sent him away, and he was living in the graveyard. And so for those people who were afraid of him when they were with him, when he was with them, out of sight, out of mind. He was different. They got rid of him. They didn't have to deal with it anymore. Right? Jesus healed him. And now we have something else to look at. First of all, the people were afraid of Jesus, logically, because of the power that Jesus showed in healing this man. But I suspect that there was another fear going on. Here was a man that they knew. They knew him in a particular way. They'd known him for a long time. They knew how he behaved. They were frightened of him. They were scared of him, and they came out of town and they saw, here's a man who is now perfectly well, just like any of us. And the challenge for those people, if they were to stop and think about it at all, would be, how am I going to be in relationship with this man now? I chose no relationship. We exiled him. He was gone. I didn't have to have a relationship with him. But now, he's just like me. What do I do? Now again, if they thought intentionally about what to do with that relationship, they might have been able to see past what they already knew. Would they let the filters of what had been continue to stay there and influence how they engaged him or didn't in the future? Or would they be willing to take off that filter and look at him differently, to look at him in a new way. That's a challenge for all of us when it comes to any of the differences that we engage. And for each of us, the other, the person who is the other for us, is different for each person. Okay, somebody I might have a very difficult problem engaging might be somebody that you would engage very easily, and vice versa. Okay? And I'm really now talking about the categories of difference that we generally throw out there, and there are a lot of them. What are some of the categories of difference that we engage in our culture? Race, religion, mental illness, financial, cleanliness, language, gender, and sexual identity would go along with that. What else? Status. Poverty. And it can go on and on and on. And each one of us, again, for some of us, some of those are bigger differences than others. Okay? But there are other differences that we don't think of as often. How about the newcomer? How about the newcomer to your neighborhood? Somebody moves in to your neighborhood. What about the new coworker? How about the new student in your school? How about guests in our church? For some people, the newcomer is someone who's different and who is difficult to engage. When I was in moving into middle school, they're opening a new school building, and it's going to be grades 6 through 8. But also in that school, they moved the classrooms for what were called at that time the special ed kids. And they were up the classrooms were up in one of the wings, and some of our classrooms were over here. So, and we all ate in the same cafeterias, so we engaged each other at least we saw each other. Let me rephrase that. We saw each other on a regular basis. And I always thought that was really neat. I mean, I was glad to have them there. I don't know that I could have explained it, but I look back on that as a positive memory. And at the same time, I did not know how to talk with students with cerebral palsy, with folks who moved awkwardly, for kids who could not speak well, for those who couldn't control their drooling, who couldn't. I mean, it's all of that kind of thing, and it made me crazy that the name calling was going on. The common word, of course, being retard, right? But there were others. But the bullying and all that kind of stuff that went on, and that made me crazy, but I did not know how. We were not taught, we were not equipped at that time to know how to deal, to engage, to be in relationship with that particular group of kids who were younger than I was. When we think about difference, when we think in the big categories, it's easier to sort of leave it there. What happens when we put a face, a specific face or a personality, an individual, to any one of those categories, it blows things open, doesn't it? When we are face to face to being in relationship with someone that in our heart of hearts we have determined is different from us, and someone from whom we feel a distance, that we've distanced ourselves for whatever reason. When we come face to face with an individual, the worldview changes. The worldview changes. I've really only had one experience as a woman priest of somebody having an overt internal problem with that, and I did not know that until he came to me and said, I was totally against women priests. I didn't want to have anything to do with women priests. I know you and I was wrong. Changed. Just being in relationship with someone changed the whole dynamic. And the same thing is happening with our gay and lesbian priest brothers and sisters. The same thing when Brad came. You know, people may have had theological, big, broad opinions about this, but when they got to know Brad, it changed. Their thoughts were, they had room for change to happen. So one of the things that I invite us to do is, number one, to broaden our view of difference. Because there may be differences that, they're the obvious ones that we listed really easily, but then they're the ones we don't think about, like the newcomer. Someone who on one level is very much like us, but is new to the system. Okay? And it may take a while for us to engage that. So I invite you to think about broadening your notice of your understanding of what difference is, to do some self-examination and say, who do I consider to be the other? Who do I distance myself from? Where are my prejudices? We're going to name the word. Where are my prejudices? Am I aware of them? And then ask ourselves the question, if I choose to be in relationship with someone, with many people, what do I have to gain from this relationship? Because, so often we let our fear take over the reason, that we allow our fear to continue distancing, to allow us to continue the distancing. But if we ask ourselves, what do I have to gain by being in relationship with this person? It turns the whole thing on its head. And isn't that what Jesus was about, was turning life on its head? What he did, it would have been very easy for Jesus to say to the man who would heal him, oh yeah, come along with me. And where would that have left Gerasa? Gerasa would have still had the man that they had exiled be gone. But instead, he tells the man, no, stay here and tell people what I have done for you. So the man goes back into his society, back into his culture, and puts the people in the position of having to confront what Jesus' power, which they were afraid of, a man who they had treated understandably but badly, to choose whether or not to be back in relationship with him, to turn their lives into a different direction. Now, my suspicion is that it was very difficult for him. My suspicion is that there were a lot of people who couldn't get past who he used to be. And that happens a lot, doesn't it? There are people who grow up and go to other parishes because the adults who were adults when I was a kid still see me as the 4-year-old. There's others who can make that transition, but there's some who can't. I think it was probably very difficult for him, but he did preach. He was Jesus' voice in that place, and that place was never the same again. Even if it was one or two people, he planted the seeds. So by going inside ourselves, by identifying who the other is for us, what our prejudices are, asking ourselves, what do I have to gain? What is God saying to me here about me, about the other person, about being in relationship? Then we are equipped to step outside that comfort zone, to perhaps identify our fear as an imagined fear, not a real one. And by doing that, inviting someone else to come into relationship, not just with you, but the God who created them and loves them just as we are loved. Amen.